Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going back to the rise of Nazi Germany.
A very, uh, a very dark chapter.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating period to study, but obviously also terrifying. And we want to figure out how did this happen?
Right.
How could something like this happen?
How could a nation like Germany be swept up by this ideology and by this one man?
Right, exactly. And so that's sort of our mission today is to really try to understand, the events that led up to the rise of the Nazi Party and all the key terms that go along with that, like Adolf Hitler,
Right. Nazism.
Nazism, Kampf,
Lebensraum.
Lebensraum,
Yeah.
all of it. We're going to cover it all today. So,
Mm.
hopefully we can kind of distill some of these really complex historical events down to some clear takeaways and some
Absolutely.
interesting details and
Yeah, and I think we can even make some surprising connections, I think, for the listeners today.
oh, cool. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I'm excited about that. All right, so let's just jump right in then. So, obviously, to understand Nazi Germany, we have to understand the context of post-World War I Germany, right? Like that's
Absolutely. We have to set the stage.
yeah,
The stage is set with, Germany in a very precarious position after World War One.
right. And a lot of that comes down to the Treaty of Versailles.
Absolutely. The Treaty of Versailles was really, I think, a turning point in a lot of ways because it was meant to prevent future conflict,
Right.
but it actually ended up fueling a lot of the resentment and instability that allowed something like Nazism to take root.
Yeah, it's like they had tried to put out a fire with gasoline or something like.
Yes, very much so.
It seems so counterproductive.
The treaty imposed these harsh punishments on Germany. They lost territory, they had to pay crippling war reparations, their military was severely restricted. And so the economic hardship that resulted from that, and the national humiliation of it all, the loss of international standing, it created this breeding ground for just this festering anger and desperation.
Right. Yeah, and into that turmoil walks
Yeah.
this figure Adolf Hitler.
Exactly.
He was a wounded veteran from World War One, right?
He was, and he joins this very small fledgling Nazi party in 1921 and quickly rose through the ranks.
And what do you think it was about him that allowed him to rise so quickly?
I mean, he was incredibly charismatic and he was a very powerful speaker.
Oh yeah.
A lot of the sources we have from the time talk about how captivating he was as a speaker.
Yeah.
And he was able to really tap into that discontent that was so widespread among Germans after the war.
Right. Yeah. He offered simple solutions to
Yes.
these really complex problems.
Exactly. He gave them somebody to blame for Germany's problems.
Right.
Primarily the Jews, but
Uh,
also, communists and the treaty itself.
right.
And he promised to restore Germany to its former greatness, to create this new Reich, a 1,000-year Reich free from, the shackles of the past.
And this is where this ideology of Nazism kind of comes into play, right?
Yes, his ideology is really what set him apart, I think, from other, right-wing nationalist figures at the time.
Right. And he lays all of this out in his book Mein Kampf.
Exactly. He writes this book while he's in prison after a failed coup attempt in 1923.
Oh, right.
And it's called Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. And it really becomes kind of the blueprint for his worldview.
So it's almost like a manifesto
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, very much so. And in this book, you see this mixture of extreme nationalism, virulent anti-Semitism, and this belief in German racial superiority, this concept of the Aryan race.
Right. And also the idea of Lebensraum.
Ah, yes, Lebensraum, this idea of living space,
That means-
that Germany needed more living space.
Yeah, it always sounded so innocuous to me, like, oh, they just want more space.
Right.
But it's so much more than that.
It's much more sinister than that it justified his expansionist policies, specifically targeting Eastern Europe for conquest and colonization.
Right.
He believed that Germany needed more land to support its growing population and to fulfill its destiny as this dominant power.
Right. Yeah, to achieve world domination, essentially.
Exactly.
So we have all these pieces in place, right? We have, a wounded Germany.
Right.
We have this charismatic leader with a dangerous ideology. We have
Yeah.
a population that's desperate for change. But how does he actually gain power? I mean, Germany was a democracy at this point.
It was the Weimar Republic, and it was a very fragile democracy.
Right.
It faced so many challenges, political instability, economic crisis, and the rise of these extremist movements on both the left and the right.
Yeah, so it sounds like, almost ripe for somebody to come in and take advantage of that.
Yes, and that's exactly what Hitler did. He exploited this instability to his advantage.
And how did he go about doing that? What were some of the key events or strategies that he used?
Well, there's one event in particular that really helped him consolidate power, the Reichstag fire in 1933.
Oh yeah, the Reichstag fire. That was the fire that destroyed the German Parliament building.
Right.
And a lot of people believe that the Nazis themselves set the fire.
Yes. The true cause of the fire is still debated to this day, but I think what's crucial is how the Nazis exploited the fire.
Okay.
Regardless of who said it, they used it as a pretext to create this climate of fear and to crack down on their political opponents.
So they essentially used this crisis, whether they manufactured it or not, as an excuse to seize more power.
Exactly.
Okay.
Hitler persuaded President Hindenburg to issue this decree called the Reichstag Fire Decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed for the arrest of political opponents, mainly communists.
Oh, wow.
So this marked a real turning point, a shift from this, fledgling, struggling democracy to an increasingly authoritarian state.
It's frightening how quickly things can unravel like that.
Yeah.
How quickly fear can be used to just erode freedoms.
Absolutely. And to enforce their control, the Nazis created these two very powerful organizations, the SS and the Gestapo.
Okay, let's talk about those. Let's start with the SS. What was the SS?
Well, the SS stands for Schutzstaffel, which means protection squadron.
Okay.
And they started as Hitler's personal bodyguard unit.
Okay.
But under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, they grew into this vast and terrifying organization.
So they kind of evolved from just being bodyguards to something much more sinister.
Exactly. They became the embodiment of Nazi ideology, fanatically loyal to Hitler, and responsible for carrying out some of the regime's most horrific crimes, including the Holocaust.
And what about the Gestapo?
The Gestapo, the Geheime Staatspolizei.
Okay.
They were the secret police force of Nazi Germany.
So like if the SS was like the muscle, the Gestapo was like the eyes and ears of the Nazi regime.
Yes. A good way to put it, they were responsible for spying on citizens, silencing dissent, and rooting out any perceived enemies of the state.
So basically they created this atmosphere of fear and paranoia where anybody could be arrested or tortured or disappear.
Exactly. If you even whispered any opposition to the Nazi party, you were at risk.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a very frightening time to live in Germany.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very sophisticated system of control, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't just about force and intimidation. It was also about controlling the narrative, shaping how people thought.
Right, and this is where propaganda comes in.
Exactly. Propaganda played a crucial role in solidifying the Nazis' grip on power.
And the mastermind behind all that was Joseph Goebbels.
Right? Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda.
Right.
A brilliant but ruthless manipulator, he understood the power of media of controlling the narrative.
Right, and he used every tool at his disposal, right? I mean, radio newspapers, film.
Posters, rallies, architecture, art.
Wow.
He created this cult of personality around Hitler, portraying him as the savior, a strong leader who would restore Germany to its rightful place in the world.
Right, and at the same time, demonizing anybody who opposed them.
Exactly. He demonized enemies, both internal and external.
Yeah.
The Jews, the communists, the democracies, you name it.
And they also really focused on young people, right? I mean,
Right.
there was this whole thing with the Hitler Youth.
The Hitler Youth was a key part of the Nazi indoctrination program.
Right.
It was compulsory for boys, and there was a similar organization for girls called the League of German Girls.
Right.
And through these organizations, young people were immersed in Nazi ideology, trained in military drills, taught to be loyal and obedient to the Führer.
Wow. I mean, just imagine the impact on a young mind being constantly exposed to that kind of propaganda. It's really
Yeah,
chilling.
it was a calculated and very effective strategy. They understood that to control the future, they had to control the minds of the young,
Right.
mold them in their image.
Yeah, and this all ties back to that core element of Nazism that we talked about earlier, anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. Hitler's hatred of the Jews was central to his ideology. They were scapegoated for all of Germany's problems. The loss of World War I, the economic depression, the perceived moral decay of society.
Right, and this prejudice very quickly turned into policy, right, with the Nuremberg Laws in 1935.
Yes, the Nuremberg Laws were a series of laws that systematically stripped Jews of their citizenship, their rights, and their livelihoods.
So it wasn't just, hatred, it was actually codified into law.
Exactly.
Wow.
They defined who was Jewish, based on ancestry, not religious practice.
Oh, wow.
They prohibited marriage and sexual relationships between Jews and non-Jews.
Oh, my gosh.
And they excluded Jews from public life, banning them from certain professions, from owning businesses, even from attending public school.
So it was a complete and total exclusion from German society.
It's a legal framework for persecution.
Yeah, and then 2 years later, in 1938, came Kristallnacht.
Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass.
Right, a night of just horrific violence against Jewish communities throughout Germany and Austria.
It was a pogrom, a state-sanctioned wave of violence.
Yep.
Nazi mobs attacked Jewish businesses, homes, and synagogues, burning them to the ground, vandalized property, looted stores, terrorized Jewish families.
Yeah, those images are just seared into history. You know, the shattered glass littering the streets, the synagogues engulfed in flames. It's horrifying.
It was a terrifying escalation of violence, a clear sign of what was to come.
Right. It shattered any illusion of safety for Jews in Germany.
Absolutely.
And really foreshadowed the horrors of the Holocaust.
Yeah, Kristallnacht was a turning point from legal discrimination to overt violence.
Right. Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about, how quickly things escalated from prejudice to violence. And, we've covered a lot of ground here today, going back to the impact of World War I and then, the rise of Hitler and ending with, the horrors of Kristallnacht. As we wrap up this deep dive, I guess can we pull back a little bit and try to kind of connect all the dots? What are the key takeaways here for understanding how Nazi Germany came to be?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the rise of Nazi Germany was not inevitable. It was a complex process, a confluence of factors that created the conditions for extremism to take root and flourish.
Oh, it wasn't just about one charismatic leader or, a single event.
Exactly. It was a perfect storm, so to speak.
Right.
You had the humiliation and economic hardship caused by the Treaty of Versailles, which created this widespread resentment.
Right.
And then you had Hitler and the Nazi Party, who exploited that resentment, offering scapegoats and simplistic solutions.
Right.
And then they used propaganda and intimidation to silence opposition and consolidate their power.
Yeah, it's a reminder that, democracy is fragile.
Very much so.
It requires vigilance,
Yeah.
Active participation from citizens.
Absolutely. We need to be wary of those who exploit fear and anger, who offer these easy answers to complex problems.
Right.
We need to be critical of information, seek out multiple perspectives, challenge propaganda.
Right.
And we need to defend democratic institutions and the rule of law.
Yeah, those are really important lessons, I think, from history that resonate even today.
The past may not repeat itself exactly,
Right.
but it certainly offers valuable lessons for the present.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for guiding me through this complex and often very disturbing period of history.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the rise of Nazi Germany. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic.
Yeah.
Seek out diverse perspectives, read more, learn more, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.